successfully share my PowerPoint. I don't always do PowerPoint, but I feel that it's appropriate to this particular topic. So let me see if, so can you all still see me and see my PowerPoint?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, great. All right, so thank you so much for inviting me. I love this sort of thing. I love it because, you know, especially the further along I get in my career, you know, the more it rings true to me that the more interesting and pressing and difficult questions are not questions that can be resolved by reference to any one discipline. And so I just have this growing commitment to fostering and participating in interdisciplinary research. And, you know, I have the benefit of one of my mentors, Carol Palmer at the I School at the University of Washington, who's studied interdisciplinarity and reminds me that, you know, in order to have interdisciplinary work, you need to still have disciplines. And so it's incredibly important to preserve that deep understanding that comes from discipline, in my view, but also to find ways and methods, in a sense, meta methods for us to work together and integrate our insights. And so the project that I selected to talk to you about is one such project, and it comes out of the Tech Policy Lab at the University of Washington. And the Tech Policy Lab is an interdisciplinary research unit that formally bridges computer science, information science, and law. And we have a governance structure where we have 3 co-equal faculty directors. We also have closely affiliated associate faculty in a range of other disciplines, including you know, linguistics and natural language processing, electrical engineering, urban design, and so on. And so what we do is we put together interdisciplinary teams to you know, gain traction on research questions that seem to admit of analysis from multiple disciplines. And so the particular project I want to talk to you about concerns the question of whether fooling an AI system, whether just sort of colloquially, or, you know, trying to be a little cute about the title, you know, tricking a robot, but essentially, you know, manipulating an artificial intelligence system, whether that would be treated as hacking under anti-hacking laws. And in order to, and what the consequences of that might be. And in order to do that, we felt we needed a team that understood the various component parts of the question. And so a couple members of the team, myself, my former student, David, now in private practice, are from law. We have somebody who does computer security, Tadayoshi Kono, probably known to many of you as he's very well known in computer security. Somebody who does adversarial machine learning, which I'll talk about that concept, which is essentially artificial intelligence and computer security, and then another person who mostly does artificial intelligence. And so we put together this team to understand the different component parts of the question that I'm going to talk about. And, you know, it has all the challenges and roadblocks and, you know, difficulties that you might imagine, right? I mean, so like in publishing an interdisciplinary article, depending on what the norms of the journal or the conference are, it can affect the order that you put the authors in, right? And so if, you know, you put an author first and it signals one thing in one community and another thing in another community. So even something as sort of prosaic as that is a challenge, but it's also deeply, deeply rewarding. So we have this anti-hacking law called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act that I know is known to most of you. And it's been in the news because on Monday, there was an oral argument in an important CFAA case called Van Buren, which I'll return to. But the basic idea is that the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is the paradigmatic anti-hacking law. And it came to be, apparently, and there's a reference to this even in the legislative record, it came to be because a bunch of policymakers got very, very concerned about the Matthew Broderick movie War Games, in which a young Matthew Broderick sort of, accesses a government computer and accidentally almost triggers a nuclear war. And this freaked folks out. And around the same time when they were already contemplating, computer-related legislation, and we got the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is, while certainly not the only anti-hacking law, is one of the most prominent. And it has a particular feature, which is that it defines hacking. It doesn't say the word hacking, but it defines the idea of hacking as being when you basically access a protected computer or a computer system, pretty broadly defined, in a way either that is unauthorized or exceeds your authorization. So it's either unauthorized, like in the Matthew Broderick, like you're not allowed to be in that government computer, for example, or it exceeds authorization, like in the Van Buren case, where it was a Georgia police officer who was able to access a license plate reading system, but did so for the wrong reason. In fact, to see whether or not a stripper was an undercover police agent. So it's a rather interesting, colorful set of facts. But so it's the idea of it not just that you break into a computer, but that you can be in there, but you're exceeding your authorization. And then you have to do something else usually. So if it's a protected government computer, the mere fact of breaking into it can be enough to trigger criminal liability. But if it's not a government computer, then usually you have to do a little more. You have to, for example, exfiltrate something, take data out, change data, cause some problem, deny service, which we'll come back to. But you got to do something a little bit more than just get in there. And so this idea that hacking for purposes of law is unauthorized access is not limited to the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And so, for example, you look at this Convention on Cybercrime, which is, in a sense, sort of restating a lot of what is understood about what it is to hack. You see that it talks about the access to the whole intent when committed intentionally, the access to the whole or in part of a computer system without right. So it's the same basic idea there going on, which is that you are hold on a second, I just lost everybody. There we go. So you are getting into a system that you don't have a right to get into. All right. So enter artificial intelligence. And so, I don't think I need to give too much background on what artificial intelligence might be to this crowd. But let me just say quickly that as I understand artificial intelligence, it's not a single thing, but rather it is a set of techniques that are aimed at approximating some aspect of human or animal cognition using machines. And within that broad umbrella, there's one set of techniques that is machine learning. And typically machine learning involves training up a model on an existing set of data, and then having trained the model, entering into an inference phase where you show the model a piece of information that is either new or was withheld from the original training data set. And you ask the system to classify what it is observing on the basis of the features it extracted from the model. And so, for example, this is a famous one where there was a system that was shown a bunch of pictures of wolves and dogs that were labeled wolf and dog, and then later shown new pictures of a wolf or a dog, and it was asked to classify whether the picture was of a wolf or a dog. Now, what you can see readily from this slide is that it hasn't been super successful all the time. And so in the bottom right, you see an example where the system has misclassified obviously a dog as a wolf. And it won't take you long to see why that is. What is the difference between that wolf, that dog and the other dogs above it that causes it to be looked at as a wolf? Obviously, it's the presence of snow. And so what happened was that the folks who built this model, really what they did is they, they built a snow detector, okay? And indeed, I'm reminded of that, that saying that I love so much, which is, you know, the problem with computers is that they will do what you say and not what you mean. So the relevant feature that was extracted here was essentially snow. The presence of snow means wolf. So if you know that, if through trial and error you figure that out, or you have prior knowledge of the model, well, gosh, you can trick this system anytime you want. And so, for example, and this is a very fanciful example, obviously, but say you, for whatever reason, you want a system to believe one thing or the other. So you're trying to get a license for your wolf to be treated like a dog. And so you just show a picture of the wolf that's not in snow, and you ask the system, is it okay for me to get this because it's a dog? And the system says, sure, it's a dog, obviously, because there's no snow. You can manipulate a system once you understand it. So my colleagues at the University of Washington, who focus on this sort of interesting new area that's evolving, that's called adversarial machine learning, have taken this out for a spin in an interesting way. So first of all, adversarial machine learning. So adversarial machine learning, I'm probably telling you something you already know, but the basic idea is that you are using your understanding of a model in order to do something adversarial. And that may be the classic idea of manipulating the system into seeing something, into making an error. And my colleagues, what they showed was that if you perturb a stop sign in a particular way, you can get a driverless car classifier, and they assure me it works with a detector as well, but a classifier to mischaracterize a stop sign as a speed sign, just by perturbing it in the way that you see here, which does not to our eye look any different, but to a driverless car, for example, would make this look like a stop, would look like a speed sign. So that's one set of techniques which involves purposely manipulating the system. Another involves poisoning the data. So if you open source a training phase, and you understand how that works a little bit, you can purposely introduce error into the system. So that's what happened, I think, essentially with Microsoft Tay, that bot that started being racist, was the fact that trolls figured out that they could poison the data. I think that was actually an early and interesting example of adversarial machine learning in many ways. And yet another is that if you have access to a trained model and you can query it cleverly over and over and over again, sometimes you can reconstruct some or all of the training data in a way that's quite unexpected. So you exfiltrate the training data. And those are some of the techniques that people are putting under the umbrella of adversarial machine learning. So one example is my colleagues doing this stuff about driverless cars. Another is a good example I like out of Berkeley, wherein Berkeley researchers showed that you could essentially get the echo. I won't say the wake word for those of you who have one in your office or your room. You can get the echo to order things online by playing tones that it understands as human commands to buy things, even though our ears don't hear it. Okay, so again, you're manipulating this system in order to do something you want, buy your product, whatever it happens to be, even in a way that this tricks the system, but does not register with the person, and so on. So what does the law do with this? Well, gosh, I mean, you know, in many ways, when you purposely trick a driverless car into speeding through a stop sign, that seems like a pretty good candidate for something being unlawful. And a lot of these things, like when you trick Echo into buying things, or you whatever it happens to be, it does feel at one level like you're hacking. And certainly the very same community that is been invested in research and in white hat hacking is now turning over to this area. And so the very same people who were doing, cybersecurity and computer security are now doing this work. And so there's a sense in which it seems related, but the courts haven't quite gone there. And so in our research, David found, my former student found, a great case about CFAA liability, in which an individual gambler figured out that that there were certain styles of virtual slot machines that if you hit the buttons in like a particular order, you were much more likely to win, and like made a bunch of money this way. And the casinos figured it out, and they sued under the civil provision of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And that basically they were getting hacked. And but the court didn't buy it, and the court said, well, no, actually, this is not hacking. It's not good. It's not, you can kick this person out. It doesn't seem to be awesome. But at the same time, like, they're not bypassing a security protocol. They're not exceeding their authorization. They're not unauthorized access. They're just manipulating the system in a way that gives a result that you don't like. And that's not the same thing as hacking. In fact, if you were to characterize tricking a robot as hacking, or if you were to characterize adversarial machine learning as a Computer Fraud and Abuse Act issue, there would be all kinds of things that would be swept in that you probably wouldn't want. And so, for example, you go into an airport and there are facial recognition cameras that are government owned. And so all you have to do is, access them without authority or whatever it happens to be. And you wear makeup designed to trick the system. All of a sudden, you are guilty of at least a misdemeanor under federal law because you have hacked a government computer. Okay? So we don't want that. We don't want that. And indeed, we're still, and the reason that so many people from our own community have been watching the Van Buren case from the Supreme Court so closely is because oftentimes the very way in which we figure out that an AI system is unsafe or biased or has all the other kinds of problems that people have identified in this space is because researchers have kicked the tires on them and have hacked into them and figured them out or whatever it happens to be. And so, you see references here to Yoshi, my colleague and co-director. You see a reference to Ed Felton. But this is basically Electronic Frontier Foundation pointing out that we need a security exception to the CFAA because that's how we figure out whether systems are vulnerable. That is even more so true where we have systems that are actually driving cars around and making decisions about people's lives. We need researchers to be able to tell us whether they're adequately safe and unbiased and the like. And in order to do that, they may need to do something that can't be construed as being a violation of the CFAA. I remember I was at a talk at AI Now, and the current Julia Angwin, the current head of the markup, but then at the Wall Street Journal, was talking about her, or actually at ProPublica, was talking about her award-winning work about machine bias, and made an offhand remark about how the way we figured out that this system was biased probably violated federal law, but anyway, right? And so she took that risk because she had real smart lawyers and people helping her, but it can have a chilling effect if not. So one way to look at this is just to say, this is not a hard problem, Ryan. I mean, so what we do is we just say, this stuff doesn't violate the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, right? I mean, no problem. But it's not so easy. I mean, first of all, there have certainly been precedents that, unlike the example of the gambling in a casino, that have actually suggested that maybe some of this stuff would be a Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. So for example, denial of service attacks, which are designed to have so many inputs that it overwhelms the system. Those have been construed as being Computer Fraud and Abuse Act violations. even where the system at issue was something like a police radio system rather than a classic computer system. So if CFAA has gone that far, it's hard to begin to distinguish some of these other cases. If you do something that is against, the public safety, like change a stop sign in the eyes of a driverless car, that feels like it may be the kind of thing that the prosecutors would throw the book at, and they'd have precedent to do so. The other reason, though, is that the flip side of this idea that hacking is breaking in is that we have a set of expectations about what constitutes adequate security. Okay, so what is it for a system to be secure enough? And if a system is very insecure and it's super easy to hack into, then actually that turns out to open up companies to liability, at least from the Federal Trade Commission, which has construed very bad security, inadequate security, as unfair for purposes of the Federal Trade Commission Act. We have expectations about companies that they not release products and systems into the world that are utterly insecure. And that model, too, is a model about whether or not they're easy to hack, easy to break into. So if we just say, this stuff, adversarial machine learning is something else, it's not hacking, well then, what kinds of expectations does that create in companies and others who release these systems into the world that are not easy to hack, but they're super easy to fool? So for example, how do we feel about Tesla making a system that is so easy to fool that Tencent researchers were able to get the Tesla to change lanes just by putting a couple of stickers in the road, right? And that is really not good design, really not good design. That would permit stickers to cause your car to veer into the other lane, okay? Don't we want to hold Tesla accountable for that? So it's no solution just to wave your hand and say, fine, CFA doesn't apply to that, and let's be clear about that. Because there are all kinds of ways in which our researchers are going to be doing something, or malicious actors are going to be doing something that we do think of as pushing the boundaries and as hacking. And also, it doesn't set the right accountability measures. So I'm going to stop sharing and open up the discussion here, but let me just reiterate that this work would have not been as good, or would have maybe not been possible, had we not had people on the project that could say all the different parts of it, right? I mean, so for me, like, careful definition of the technology at issue is critically important. And so we were able to say with some authority, what is adversarial machine learning? What typifies it? How is it different from previous? We were able to talk a lot about what security researchers do in practice and what obstacles they run into, because we had literal security researchers, including people that have revealed vulnerabilities that have caused the car industry to make changes, and embedded medical devices to make changes. And we had myself and a law student who were able to read the case law and find really cool, interesting edge cases, like the case of the casino, because that's what we do all the time. We interpret the law. And so it was a challenge to integrate this work, but I'm very proud of it. That is not to say that I'm not open to any kind of criticism and critique, and I very, very much welcome it. You're very welcome to say that I'm completely full of shit. That is absolutely fine. But nevertheless, I'm proud of of this work anyway, and I'm happy to share it with you. So let me stop there and just see if there's any question or comment.
I have a question. I think, yeah, I guess my question is, can you articulate the best case, or a strong case, for why this sort of adversarial machine learning, these examples you've talked about, would be considered hacking under FAA without maybe without appealing to sort of the badness of the outcome, right? Just sort of the language of the CFAA, because like I guess I don't yet understand sort of how to connect putting stickers on the stop sign with the words accessing and the words authorized access, or whatever the language is of the CFAA that you said quickly at the beginning, but I don't remember because I don't know off the top of my head. But can you sort of articulate the legal argument?
Absolutely. So the legal argument comes less from the literal text of the CFAA and more from its aggressive and broad interpretation along a number of lines in the courts. Okay. First of all, what constitutes a protected computer is very expansive. You know, it's come to encompass like anything, you know, that's not analog, basically, even some things that seem to be. And so it's sort of system. It's become system instead of computer. And the second thing especially is the very broad interpretation of what it means to exceed authorization or to engage in unauthorized access. I mean, the Van Buren case is one example. Again, this is a police officer who is allowed to access the database of license plates readers and does so during the course of his employment. Just his motivations are crappy because he's he's unwittingly part of an FBI sting operation. So he looks up whether somebody might be an undercover officer. You know what I mean? So even though he's allowed to be there, his bad motivation was enough to let multiple layers of courts uphold his conviction, right? And now we're before the Supreme Court. But let me give you an example that shows the expansion on both the levels. There was a case in which somebody's sin was that they purposely broadcast across a spectrum that was reserved for police, thereby denying the ability of the police to use their own radio system. That was found to be a Computer Fraud and Abuse Act violation. You know what I mean? So if that is a Computer Fraud and Abuse Act violation, then I think purposely tricking a driverless car into misconstruing a stop sign as a speed sign would be.
So I want to ask just one quick follow-up.
Yeah.
What's the difference between sort of doing a couple of the examples, the stickers on a stop sign or the creepy person playing a tone for Amazon in that cartoon? Both of them, in the example, it was sort of important, or at least it feels important that that to the human they sort of don't see the difference, or they don't see they don't predict the effect that the tone or the stickers are going to have on a computer. But what separates those cases from cases that are not that are just blatant, sort of somebody shouting, "Hey, Amazon, whatever, ordered $1,000 worth of goods," or just replacing the stop sign with a yield sign or something? Why, for the purposes of CFAA, why are those different cases?
I think that's a fair question, but you know, you could tweak it and say, why is it a Computer Fraud and Abuse Act problem for you to break into a computer and destroy all the files there, right? When you could literally break into the room and set fire to the server. You see what I mean? It proves a little too much. It's the way in which you do it that the CFAA is interested in. And the CFAA exists out of a belief that there are these Matthew Broderick-like hackers sitting around who can access the nuclear silos, right? And so it's this idea that computers are too powerful and our reliance on them opens us up to you know, a hacker in the basement, to sort of paraphrase our you know, fearless leader. You know, it opens us up to these bad actors, and it's too easy, and whatever else happens to be. And so it's a special kind of way of getting at a crime that could be committed another way. And that would translate readily into this context. Yes, of course, you could put a pillowcase over a stop sign and accomplish much the same thing. You know what I mean? But it's the way you're doing it the way you're doing it that opens you up to liability in the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act case. And I think the flip side of that too, which I will readily concede, is that a lot of this stuff is illegal anyway. Not the casino, interestingly example, right? But certainly if you were to purposely cause people to blow through stop signs, however you did that would be super, super duper illegal, right? And so I'm not trying to say that the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is the only way to reach this activity.
We've got Andy. Andy has his hand up, and then Ron.
Sure.
Great. So I love this topic. This concern about trickery and how it can be used is constantly in my mind, because it's something that our clinic sees all the time. We've seen a lot of people conduct research by fooling machines and doing some of the same, some like Yoshi Kono's techniques of just figuring out how machines function, some that are doing, the bias studies like the Gender Shades project that Joy Boulin-Winnie did. And so this question about sort of the legal contours in this space is something we're thinking about all the time. And so I really like this project. Maybe I have like a lot of different thoughts. We should just get a coffee sometime and go through all of them. But I guess one that I'm thinking about for here is, I can't help myself. I'll ask two. One is that, do you think that there's anything that you and your CS colleagues that you worked at this and can do with the few, maybe just a couple of cases we have under the CFAA where we actually looked at a pure code-based theory of authorization? So I'm thinking about way back to the Morris case and the intended function test that the Morris case presented. Is that a useful heuristic or method or tool as you consider these different types of cases here? And then second, I was struck as I was thinking about the Tesla 10-cent research example. I'm not sure who we're trying to put whose house we're trying to put a pox on there, because I could easily see that, if we let that broad sense of the CFAA cover a 10 cents case, that might actually let Tesla off the hook a little bit, because they may feel as though they don't have to design away that issue or edit their model such they no longer confront it. They would have a plausible enough argument to say, well, we didn't spend the extra energy to stop people from doing the sticker thing because it would be illegal for them to do the stop the sticker thing. So we didn't think we had to design against it. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, Andy, let me take those back in backward order. Exactly, right? That's the tension. In other words, that if you decide that we are going to make this stuff unlawful under CFAA, then it does it does two things. First, it gives Tesla a way to sue these researchers and penalize them and chill future research. But it also may give them a bit of an argument. And I will say though, Andy, that of course, all of the actions that have violated the security of Twitter or Microsoft or anybody else under a consent decree with the Federal Trade Commission, all of them have been illegal. And nevertheless, the FTC has in some cases fined the crap out of these companies for having really bad security. And maybe they went too far with LabMD, maybe not, but it was never okay for anybody, there's always illegal. And so I'm taking as a given that there's going to be bad actors out there and they're going to be doing illegal stuff, although the law doesn't always do that. I mean, as you know, for example, in tort law, which I teach tort law, you have this idea of a superseding cause. So if you're trying to get at somebody for negligence, but the way you got hurt was because a third party maliciously and purposely exploited that negligence, sometimes courts will say, well, there's a superseding cause here, right? But we don't do that with adequacy of security, okay? And then on the Morris point, what you'll find in the paper itself, which is also titled "Is Tricking a Robot Hacking," is a much deeper dive on the precedent, which David and I did, and did in fact walk through some of the different theories and applied them to adversarial machine learning. And I agree with you that that particular line of cases is particularly fruitful. Yeah.
All right, I've got Ron and then a bunch of other people with their hands up.
I'll be shorter in my answer. Sorry.
No, it's fine. We've got plenty of time. We've got, we have until 5, so we're good.
Okay.
So again, a couple of questions. There are a lot of thoughts going on in my mind as you were speaking. So one was that so I was trying to, what would be the reason for this CFAA to begin with? And that would be, we already have laws in regulation standing in place, and what is illegal to break into somebody's house and to steal information and to whatever, manipulate things maliciously in the physical world. And so we don't need there. So, but now there's this new thing, this computer, that you can actually do things from your home, from your chair, without doing anything as if, right? So, but you're still doing damage. So we need this new set of laws in order to outlaw things that you can do virtually, in the virtual world without leaving your chair, right? So that's why it's needed. Whether it's exactly the right thing or not, it's a different issue. But somehow now you're saying, let's take it back to the physical world. We're saying, let's leave the virtual world where everything is just, keyboard and text and screens and the databases, but we're back in the physical world. But somehow, if you're back in the physical world, then you already have our physical world's laws there, right? What is legal, what is not legal for people to do in the physical world. And in some sense, there in the physical world, maybe it's the role of the computers to if computers want to act in the physical world, then that's some sense. There's no reason to change the laws of people's behaviors in the physical world. So if I want to wear a makeup, which is funny, or even if it's purposely destructive to a computer, but just walking through an airport with a makeup, there's no reasonable way to consider me as doing something, accessing a computer. That's kind of like the onus is on the computer to do with, right? When they're taking cameras of, picture of the physical world, in some sense. So it's a different. So no, there's a different sense of what it should be legal or illegal, right? So if I put a sticker on a stop sign, I do something physical, as a person. In some sense, I'm putting a sticker on a stop sign, right? If the computer it chooses to interpret it in a funny way, that's their business, in some sense. So that's one sort of thinking. So which also goes in this. Context of in some sense you want to put the onus on the computer systems to not do things that people don't expect or something. People don't expect that in the physical world it should be on the computers, the designers' plate, not on the hacker's plate. Is that something that could resonate, could make sense? I don't know. So it was just one thing is just maybe anecdotal, but it's something that I've been whatever I encountered. Cases about trade, trade secrets and the stealing of trade secrets I've seen cases where the judge struck out trade secrets claims, stealing claims, because the company didn't put enough restrictions and didn't protect it enough. So that's if the company didn't protect it to sufficient extent, then there is no liability. I know something like that can be applied here, or does it make sense to apply? So any thought about that?
Well, I think I think there's two interrelated points, and I kind of want to disentangle them. But you tell me if I'm going the wrong way here. So one thing is sometimes the law will treat physical harms very differently than digital ones. Okay, and that's certainly the case. For example, if you design software in a way that's done poorly, and the consequence is that somebody loses part of their PhD. Sorry for the PhD candidates here, and if I should have done a trigger warning about that. But you lose a chapter of your PhD because of some glitch in the software. You really have no course of action. I mean, you really don't have anybody to sue over that. Because of the way that the law does it. And so, but versus instead, if you have a poor software results in the Toyota suddenly accelerating and someone gets physically harmed. In other words, it's bones instead of bits on the line. The law may treat that differently. However, at least as far as I can see, the law around the anti-hacking laws seem to be rather agnostic as to how you initiated the underlying hack. So for example, imagine a situation where a person leaves a USB device physically in a parking lot, hoping that an employee will pick it up and stick it into their, you know what I mean? It's just like, so there's a physical component of it. But we wouldn't say any less that if that script then ends up running and opens up, creates a buffer overflow or whatever it would do, right? So it does something and then allows you a way in. The physicality of it is immaterial. And so, the same thing with trade secret. So with trade secret, you hack into somebody's server, you discover how they're making their chicken sandwich that's been so popular, right? Or conversely, famously in privacy, you fly over somebody's chemical plant and you look at the arrangement of their chemical plant and you figure out something about their industrial processes through that. You know what I mean? Like if you got the industrial processes by hacking in from in your pajamas at your house, or you flew over on a plane, trade secret, right? And so that's one set of issues where, does it matter if the way that you hack is by painting your face, or the way that you hack is you're sitting at a keyboard, right? And I think largely the law would be agnostic about that, although we certainly think of physical harms differently and have attached different penalties to that. The other question relates to the thing that we were talking about with Aloni, I think, which is, can't you get at it with other laws? And why do we need a special law that when it comes to computers? And that is certainly true, and I completely concede. It's not like, the whole thing with Van Buren is so ridiculous. Think about what Van Buren's doing. This guy is looking up one of his fellow officers in a database to see if they're undercover in order to help what he thinks is a crime syndicate. You know what I mean? Like, that's super illegal. Like, you can't do that, right? It doesn't matter how you do it. If you call somebody on the phone, if you go to that strip club yourself and ask for, it does not matter how you do that. It's super, super illegal. And so why are we using the CFAA? Oh, because it's this gotcha tool that's just lying around and prosecutors like it because they can, you know what I mean? And so, and it has pretty heavy penalties attached to it. And it has the gee whiz bang kind of oomph that technology gives us. But I completely agree that almost all of this stuff is going to be illegal regardless,
Thanks. Adam.
Sorry, it took me a minute to find the unmute button. Yeah, so I guess it seems like a lot of the cases, like the dividing line in a lot of the cases you discussed, boils down to, whether or not these activities seem bad under like pre-digital concepts of right and wrong, right? Like, roughly do they, I don't know if it lines up exactly with things that are, could be dealt with by other laws. But it certainly seems like in a lot of these things, the kind of digital aspect of it is like not maybe the most salient. But I guess there were a couple of things that resonated with me. One is first of all, the concept of access seems like the wrong handle to try to pull on this problem with, right? So I definitely agree. But I wanted to push on that. Like, it seems that the place where it's the gray area is most thorny to me is when, like, how do you distinguish like reasonable versus unreasonable attacks that kind of good security should worry about, right? So, like, coming to the Tesla example, if indeed at this point, given like, let's see if I can articulate what I'm trying to say. It seems like the line we're looking for and maybe you correct me if I'm wrong, is that an attack should be Tesla's fault if they should have known better. And not necessarily Tesla's, well, I mean, not only Tesla's fault, but like in particular Tesla's fault if they should have known better, but not if they could argue that this is like a completely new mode of attack, right? So, roughly like fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me, right? Is that like a reasonable way to think of disentangling not exactly what types of hacking of a car would be bad, but like where the line is in terms of negligence of the manufacturer versus just, a manufacturer trying to do its due diligence in terms of constructing a safe product?
So, okay, so Adam, I'm gonna make an assumption based on the math behind you that I don't understand, that you sit in the computer science department and not in the law, but I imagine you are also one of these people who participates in both, right? I mean, I think it's very frustrating for a lot of people in particular disciplines to have the kind of tolerance for line drawing problems that the law needs. You know what I mean? I teach torts. I spend 3 days on what constitutes unreasonableness. And how do you evidence it? What if something's illegal? What if the thing would not have happened but for negligence? What if you're a professional? Should you be held to a higher standard? Can you use circumstantial evidence to show it? You know what I mean? It drives anyone nuts, but particularly anyone who's interested in trying to find a line so that they can operationalize it. And so I guess my first line of response to you would be that, yes, you're going to have line drawing problems, but they are absolutely endemic. And it's part of the mission of law, to put it grandiosely, to try to cabin, put some kind of boundaries around the options, as well as to involve a jury of peers in a sort of quasi-democratic way of kicking norms questions to the community. So I don't disagree with you, but that holding Tesla accountable for failing to anticipate attacks will be non-trivial. But at the same time, it's how almost all of these areas of tort law work. You know what I mean? How do you figure out, you want to protect older people from those who are trying to take advantage of them in order to get access to their resources. And so you have a doctrine called undue influence. Not normal influence, like it's not undue influence to visit your grandma every week and then later on to receive money from them, but undue influence, right? It's really not easy. I will though say about your examples, about that tend to be sort of physical. I guess the example that I had not used and I often use, but I will use now to see if it resonates any differently with you, Adam, and others is like, imagine a situation where some startup, for whatever reason, decides to crowdsource reliability for purposes of creditworthiness. Okay, so they create a system that tries to crowdsource what it is, what are the attributes of somebody who is creditworthy, and they try to crowdsource this in order to train a model to be able to score people for creditworthiness when they apply for a loan from this institution. Okay, and some clever person says, you know what really should correlate with trustworthiness is like my exact address or zip code or some quality about me and my friends that would really help us get a loan. And then they purposely go into the system and they do that. You know what I mean? You could characterize that as a form of fraud, I guess, right? But it would be a special sort of fraud that involves sort of breaking the rules, and so it'd be fraud. But at the same time, it's a fraud that then affects everybody else in the ecosystem. And so all those other people in the ecosystem would be like, wow, you designed a system that was so easy to defraud that now when I try to use it, I'm viewed as a poor credit risk. And these other people who are just take advantage of the system, are not. And that seems to me like something that would be treated differently. But I would have to concede again and again that very often a lot of these sort of things can be criminalized with other measures. Now, that is not true, however, of protected government computers. And so that's why I like the example of facial recognition in a airport. So that one does feel like it's not criminal otherwise. You know what I mean? Go ahead, Evan.
The distinction, okay, I should let other people ask, but like, why is it that it doesn't feel criminal? Like if I put on makeup that gets me through a facial recognition system into a protected area of the airport where they keep weapons, why would that not be criminal activity, right? Like, it gets me into like the bomb squad area, right? Or whatever, right? Like versus, just walking in and doing my normal thing, but like messing up the facial recognition so it doesn't, charge my Starbucks card, right? Like, these seem, well, okay, that I guess is also a financial thing, but like, these seem qualitatively different types of the thing that you're presenting as like, okay, seems to me like it's only okay because it didn't actually cause, like, it's about sort of harm and effect and not about means, I guess.
And intent, I'm sorry, I'm taking a
No, go ahead, Stacey, yeah.
It strikes me that some of these examples really are about intent to achieve some harmful outcome as opposed to intent to engage in research or to sort of understand the workings of a system or a machine. And I wonder, this has been sort of my rumination throughout this talk, is sort of what difference might that make? And also, I'm sorry, I'm jumping the queue here, but what do you, Ryan, like, sort of, is there a kernel of the CFAA that you think is worth preserving, and how would you define it? So I'm really old relative to this crowd and to people, but I remember way back when the CFAA was initially being discussed and Congress was talking about acting in this space, and to my memory, part of the problem was that it was at that time very hard to prove harm or damages from real hacks right into computer systems. And it reminds me a little bit of the privacy conversations these days. Like, you're concerned about the behavior that is engaged in for a particular, with particular intent, and you think it's going to be harmful in some way, but you can't quite quantify the harm yet. So I guess the two kind of dimensions to the question are sort of what role is intent? Does intent play? Actually, three parts. Is there a kernel of the CFAA that's worth preserving? And the third part is sort of what role might harm play in that as well?
Okay, so that's a great question, and I have sort of I'm going to try to make my answer as short as possible, but I have a lot of thoughts about this. So first of all, there are plenty of areas in the law that we can point to in which doing literally the same thing in a different way subjects you to more penalty. Okay, and one of them is obvious, is conspiracy. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I mean, famously, like your first year criminal law students know that if you do something as part of a group and versus the literal same thing, not as part of a group, you can have enhanced penalties. And I think that's part of what's going on with things like the CFAA, where they're saying it's too easy. People like Matthew Broderick can break into a government system. It's too easy. We need to, ratchet up the penalty associated with that literal same conduct because they're using a computer to do it. So that's one thing. The second thing is, obviously there has to be intent. Some of these things are misdemeanors, but there still has to be intent. we know the law frowns upon certainly strict liability crimes, but even on negligence as a standard. I mean, Alanis is a great example, reminder of that from a few years ago, where the court says, look, unless Congress is really clear about wanting to use a negligence standard, we're going to assume mens rea is a minimum reckless. But intent to do what? And some of the CFAA stuff, all you have to do is intend to access a computer that is protected in a government computer, and that is it. You don't have to intend scrap another thing. It's true that with other things, you do have to intend to go in there and cause some mayhem. That's true. Although again, I mean, courts have not gone this far. They don't tend to do so in the criminal context, but I am reminded of, in tort law, the way in which there's some ambiguity about what it is you need to intend in order to accomplish an intentional tort. So for example, battery. Do you have to merely intend the contact that winds up being objectively harmful or offensive, or do you need to intend that it be harmful or offensive conduct? So intent doesn't get us, you know, that terribly far. And then the last thing about, is there anything that should remain in the CFAA? I don't object to the CFAA. When I wore my "scraping is not a crime" t-shirt on Monday for Van Buren that the markup sent me, I had a lot of privacy folks write to me and just be like, you know, there's nothing but the CFAA standing in the way of Cambridge Analytica and all the other bad players who want to do some really bad scraping. And I do think intent might be a way to manage that. You know, but look at, in contrast to the anti-circumvention in the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. And so the idea, of course, there is that there's an express research exception that was created by the library, and that's what I want to see with the CFAA, right? So I don't deeply disagree with the CFAA at some philosophical level, but at a minimum, there should be a carve out for researchers, you know? And then separately, I do think that we need to evolve cybersecurity standards. And Adam, that will be hard. I readily concede you're right. It is hard. Line drawing is very hard here. But I would also like to see us ratchet up security standards for companies so that they also have to protect against unreasonably easy manipulations.
Great, thank you. Gabe.
Yeah, so I guess I was thinking a lot about intentionality as well, and so I'm still kind of in that. So if we can dive back in a little bit, I think there's like two different kinds of intentionality here, right? There's an intention to break in, and then there's breaking in without intention, right? And those are like two flip sides of the same coin. So I could totally imagine like sending queries to password queries to a machine and never succeeding, right? Never actually succeeding in accessing. And at that point, I actually haven't done anything, right? I've just engaged in a behavior that has the propensity to become harmful in the long run. And on the flip side of this, I'm imagining like the makeup example that you kind of gave in the airport, for me, is actually like a really powerful one, in that like I think it spills over into a much larger argument, right? Because it's one thing to say like I put a bunch of blocks on my face and now like I beat the algorithm. It's another thing to say that like I am experimenting with my gender expression and therefore I want to change the way my face looks, and I'm going to put on makeup in a way that now beats all of the facial recognition stuff that we have. And at that point, like my intention is not to beat the facial recognition per se. I mean, my intention isn't at that point to change the way that I look, right? And that obviously also has the side effect of changing how machines see me as well, right? And I guess I'm trying to understand like the issue of intention kind of cuts both ways, right? It like gets you out of some things and it gets you into some problems that you wouldn't otherwise expect. And I'm wondering, like, imagine I'm an Instagram influencer, right? And I've got 5 million people who will buy my stuff. And what I decide to do is I get like one of these masks that is all pixelated and, you know, makes my face not recognizable by facial recognition. I say like, this is the cool new hip thing on the block. Everybody should buy it, right? Not because it's going to help you with anything, but because I just like the way it looks, right? And then all of a sudden I've like perpetuated this massive adversarial machine learning attack where suddenly we're breaking stuff left and right. And all I wanted to do was like sell cool stuff on Instagram, right? And I guess I don't know. I'm not sure exactly what the question is there, but rather I'm kind of baffled by how intentionality would deal with kind of all this nuance in terms of what intentions were, what intentions are, and how much intentionality can be detected at the end of the day.
I mean, I think that you're certainly right that what figuring out what someone's intent was and um, when they did what they did is going to be key. But I don't see it as being too deeply problematic. So, you know, I think if you can show a jury or, you know, you can show the court that in putting the makeup on the way that you did, you were not intending to affect a government computer. You know what I mean? One way or the other, that wasn't your intent. Um, and you didn't know that would happen. Do you see what I mean? Then you'd be fine. The situation I worry about is a situation where your specific intent, to sort of use a term of art, your specific intent is to experiment, is to be artistic and express yourself. But you are nevertheless reckless to the possibility that this will thwart the facial recognition, for example. You know what I mean? You know, there I do think that there's some ambiguity. You know, a direction we haven't headed yet with that hypothetical is that it probably also implicates the First Amendment. You know what I mean? And so there are some times when your speech, though you know it to do something else that is bad, or you know it could, if you did it for a different reason, it shields you. I mean, a famous example of that in tort is the Phelps case against the Westboro Baptist Church case, where they intended to criticize the United States government, but they knew that by protesting a funeral of a military person, you know, of a soldier, that they would cause severe emotional distress to that family. Because it was the First Amendment, we went with their specific intent and not with what they're reckless as to. And then the other one is, what if you intend to do something wrong and you don't accomplish it? Well, you know, that there's a sort of bucket for that too, right? I mean, we do have inchoate crimes, which are a combination of your intent plus an actus reus. Like you have to kind of, I'm trying to remember back. I don't teach criminal law, but you know that kind of idea, right? But so, you know, some things have inchoate crimes attached to them and some don't. So if you try to kill somebody, that's a crime, right? But if you try to break into a protected computer and you fail, I don't think that's a crime under CFAA, for example. But anyway, all this nuance about intent is super useful. But you know, ultimately, our conclusion in the paper, I'll just say, like, we're a little more modest. in the paper, we basically just say, like, there's ambiguity, and that ambiguity has costs associated with it. And let's resolve that ambiguity, because otherwise researchers don't know what they can do and can't do. Companies don't know what their obligations are. Public doesn't know if it's safe. You know what I mean? It's just like these ambiguities have costs. And so I feel like I feel like it's great to hear about the additional ambiguity, because it only reinforces our thesis.
You know, I'm sure we have more ambiguity coming. I've got Justin and Sarah and Jocelyn.
Okay,
Justin.
and then I actually have to hop off a couple minutes early just because I have to pivot to then teaching right afterwards. So I'll probably hop off in about 10 minutes. But yeah.
Okay, well, I guess I was just curious. This is sort of like Gabriel's question about intentionality, you know, and I guess do you have any discomfort with an amendment to CFAA for research purposes, sort of opening the door for further harmful, I guess, regulation of new developments in machine learning technology, and like in an increasingly sort of a world with more IoT devices and sensors everywhere, I guess, how can we expect lawmakers to regulate things that are evolving that quickly in order, I don't know, I guess there are just a lot of safety questions, especially in sort of like the driverless cars space, but, you know, increasingly in other spaces as well. I don't know. I wonder, is it a good idea to open that door? I don't know. what's sort of the quick response to just a challenge of that basic thesis?
Well, what I would like to see, just I'm not speaking for my co-authors, but personally what I would like to see is number one, I would like to see an express carve out for accountability research, right? I just want to see that the CFAA is, if your purpose of doing what you did is to test the security of the system, and you don't, cause a ton of harm in doing so, then you should have a carve out, just as you have a carve out with anti-circumvention in the copyright context. Okay, that's number one. Number two, I believe that it should be that you should violate the FTC Act, and particularly the prohibition on unfairness. Okay, by having a system that is too easily fooled in a way that hurts people, just as you have that obligation with respect to a system that's too easily hacked. Okay, but then do those two different moves open us up to all kinds of liability? In the way that Yoshi and his colleagues showed that you could trick a driverless car, with a stop sign, or the way that the Tencent researchers did it, was they created a safe environment. Do you know what I mean? In which they did that work, so that really it would be really hard for people to get hurt who didn't really sign up for it. Okay, contrast that to that ridiculous Wired situation, that article written up in Wired, where they were driving like an actual car on the real road, and then taking it over and making it swerve. If someone had gotten hurt in that latter context, to this point about things being illegal otherwise, that'd be super, super, super problematic. Okay, so Justin, if you have a researcher who is doing things, they're doing their accountability research and they're jeopardizing human lives in doing it, or like destroying entire, databases, or doing awful things, you're going to have other ways to reach them. You know what I mean? And so I don't really, this is not going to be like Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, where the immunity is so wide that you get people really worried about what it permits, right? This is going to be pretty narrow, and there are going to be ways to reach, and you could even write it that way. You could say in a way that doesn't engender people or property. You see what I mean? And so I'm not too worried about that. I think those changes are really needed, and I'm not too worried about them opening up a lot of bad action.
All right, we got to get you to teaching, but we've got Sarah.
Oh, please. Yeah, I just need to be able to transition quickly. So I have a bunch more minutes.
I'll try to go fast. And most of the things that I was thinking about were sort of already addressed. But let's say we got our dream CFAA. So we got our research exception. Let's say web scraping is okay. I know that was controversial, but let's say it's okay. We all agree that there's sort of a difference between access to a system, and maybe that'll be penalized in a different way than just, messing with the inputs to a system. So let's say we have all of this, we incorporate intent, whatever. And let's say we tighten up other adjacent laws to address some of the specific things you brought up. So let's tighten up traffic laws so you can't write stuff on a stop sign. In the same way that I assume it's illegal for me to put cones in the road. Maybe now it's illegal for me to go put stickers in the road, whatever. Okay, we have everything we want. It seems like that's still kind of the easy part, and it doesn't actually address about half of the questions that you brought up, like the casino example and the sort of airport camera example still seem like they're not covered. And it also seems like, or still seems like there's ambiguity there, and still seems like, something I don't know if you talked about, at least you didn't talk about it when I wasn't having connectivity issues, was tricking the human parts of a system. So social engineering, which is everybody's favorite phrase, I guess, for, I just trick Twitter's security password people into thinking that I'm so-and-so so that I can recover their password or whatever. I guess, do you see what's the path forward there? I guess for the more, okay, we got all these changes that are already going to make a huge difference, but then what? Then it seems like we have the big problem still, or a big problem still.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And in fact, in my mind, it also connects to a component of Justin's question I didn't actually address. one of the things that's amazing about the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act is that notwithstanding how much has changed since 1986, right? It's actually held up pretty damn well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, I don't agree with its overreach with the radio case and some of the other ones. You know what I mean? And I don't always agree with all the reasoning. But you know, it's held up pretty well over a long period of time. And the reason boils down to the standard trade-offs you have between rules versus standards, which is a well-known literature in law, which just talks about how if you have an amorphous standard like exceeds authorization and so on, then you can apply it to a really wide variety of contexts and it doesn't degrade performance. What I think is really important to notice about adversarial machine learning and about the direction of computer security research is that it's really a paradigm shift.
Mm.
All right, and so what I'm arguing for, or what I'd like to see, is another roughly amorphous standard, a high bar, because we are talking about people's lives and money, and you know what I mean, and at issue here, right? Not their literal lives, but their liberty and their money. So a high threshold, a rather amorphous open-ended statute, but one that does not foreground and turn entirely on the notion of access.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what you see time and again in most of the CFAA cases. You see this obsession with whether a security protocol has been bypassed. You don't see them in all of them. You know, suddenly with denial of service, it goes away. You know what I mean? But so I just think that ambiguity needs to get resolved. And I agree that the few edits that I'm arguing for don't resolve it. You know, and like one of the things I love to see in legal research, in legal, in the like law review articles and so on, but I don't myself do, and I wish I did. It's just really hard, and I haven't done it. But I love to see proposals of model legislation or model jury instructions. Do you know what I mean? Because it just shows, like, you know, it's not easy. It's always like I read a lot of law review articles and I think to myself, gosh, this is beautiful music, but can you dance to it? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you, you know, and I do think that I do, and in fact, this is relatively recent work this was published last year. But one of the things I want us to turn to at the lab, if we further this work, would be to generate model legislation that actually did, you know, update the CFAA for the contemporary era. But we just have not gotten to that, and I wouldn't even risk trying to speculate what I think it would look like right now, you know.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Great. Ryan, thank you so much. This has been really interesting and fun. And one of these days, we're going to have you back to Boston, and when we can have dinner together.
Oh, I love that. Yes, yes.
So
yes.
you'll be back for a talk in person when we can actually, you know, hang out more. So.
Great. I would really love that. I would love to see all of you, and I have also very, very dear friends in the academy that are in Boston now. So please, I'll take you up on that.
Thank you
Okay.
so much, and
right,
good luck
thanks,
with your
everyone.
class. We'll see you soon. Thanks.
Thanks for your great work. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.